This year died King Edward, and Harold the Earl succeeded to the kingdom and held it for 40 weeks and 1 day. And this year came William and won England. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. The Bayeux Tapestry, measuring over 200 feet in length, tells the story of the Norman Conquest. Beyond being an astonishing feat of craftsmanship, the tapestry served as a key piece of propaganda during the late 11th century, telling the story of the Norman conquest of England from the perspective of the victors. From the fall of the House of Wessex through the Norman victory at the Battle of Hastings in October 1066, this work of art tells the story of one of the most decisive events in English history. But who are the Normans? And how did their story lead them to a grassy hillside in southeast England? By the 10th century, Viking raiders had plagued not only England but also France, moving up the river valleys of the French kingdom. The rulers of France sought a diplomatic solution, offering land to the Vikings in northwest France along the English Channel, thus disinclining them to raiding and bringing them under the authority of the French crown. Within just a few generations, these Vikings, who became Normans, literally Northmen, adopted the language, culture, and Christianity of their French rulers, building magnificent churches and castles and establishing themselves among the French. The Norman rulers grew in power for over a century, and in 1028, the reigning Duke Robert I and his mistress Erleve welcomed a son into the world. The child, named William, found it difficult to overcome his illegitimacy, and after his father's death in 1035, spent portions of his childhood in hiding as other Norman nobles sought to usurp his role as duke. Having navigated a turbulent youth, William consolidated control of the duchy and soon had his eyes on a bigger prize. He was a second cousin of the aging Edward, King of England, who remained childless. The details are uncertain, but historians agree that Edward gave William at least some indication that the Norman Duke would succeed him as King of England. One of his major rivals to the throne was Harold Godwinson, the powerful English earl and brother of King Edward's wife, Edith. As the most powerful noble in England and the brother of the Queen, Harold stood a reasonable chance of becoming king upon the death of Edward. Indeed, Edward yielded the throne to Harold on his deathbed in January of 1066, a promise which contradicted his earlier assurances to William of Normandy. Further muddying the waters was a curious event alleged to have occurred years before off the coast of Normandy. According to the narrative of the Bayeux Tapestry, Harold Godwinson had been sailing in the Channel when he was shipwrecked. William rescued him, and in exchange, Harold made a pledge, sealed over the relics of a long-dead saint, not to lay claim to the throne of England against William. Of course, if we view this critically, we should question how convenient such a promise, detailed in a key piece of Norman propaganda, would be. In any case, upon the death of Edward, no promises to William that he would sit upon the throne of England were honored. William set about at once preparing for war, securing papal permission to fight for his claim, and building an invasion fleet. But William was not the only threat to Harold Godwinson's rule of England. Another claimant, owing his position to the old Danish rule of eastern England, eyed the English throne from across the North Sea. Harald Hardrada was king of Norway, but had recently failed to secure the throne of Denmark, and now grasped at another chance of securing a second kingdom for himself. With Godwinson's exiled brother Tostig at his side, Hardrada set sail for England and landed in late summer of 1066. After an initial victory, Hardrada's forces were defeated by those of Harold Godwinson at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, and the centuries-long series of Norse incursions into Britain ended. But now Harold Godwinson faced another problem. No sooner had he defeated Harold Hardrada at Stamford Bridge than he was forced to turn his army south to face the Normans. The Anglo Saxons moved rapidly, arriving in southern England, where they confronted the Normans on October 14th. The Anglo Saxons, a force of largely dismounted infantry, positioned themselves atop Senlac Hill. After repulsing several Norman attacks, the Saxon lines finally started to break, and when an arrow pierced Harold Godwinson's eye and killed him, the battle was all but over. William now turned his attention to London, which soon submitted, and he was crowned in Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day, 1066, the first Norman king of England. To consolidate his rule, he ordered construction of a castle which would become known as the White Tower, now the central keep of the Tower of London complex that would be expanded over several centuries. He also sought to assert his economic dominance over his new domain and ordered a property survey of the entirety of England, which in its published form later became known as the Domesday Book. We'll cover this in more detail in a future video. His kingdom secure, William felt comfortable enough to make return trips to Normandy. It was there in 1087 that the king died. His death saw the division of his English and his Norman possessions amongst his sons. His second son, William Rufus, inherited the English throne, but his reign was cut short by a hunting accident, and he was in turn succeeded by his brother Henry. The royal line was far from secure, however, and over the next few decades, England jumped across the family tree from Henry to his nephew, the Crusader Stephen of Blois, before descending into a civil war and eventually the ascension of Henry's grandson, also named Henry, to the throne. When Henry II took the throne in 1154, the line of Normandy ended as Henry carried the name of his father, Plantagenet. Would the young king continue the legacy of his Norman predecessors, or was England doomed to repeat the squabbling and wars of succession that ended with Norman dominance? In time, the reign of Henry II would rival that of William the Conqueror, and the nature of the English monarchy would be changed forever.